My guest tonight, who is Dr. Patrick Njoroge, who is the governor of Central Bank. Thank you very much for making time for us tonight. So we are about a third way through. We have just about a month to go to the deadline of the exchange of the old notes into the new ones. Now, for a lot that may not know, this was not only a constitutional requirement, but, according to you, it was to curb illicit financial flows, and participate in the war against corruption. How much money has been returned as of now? Because we know there's about, 217 million pieces of the 1,000 shilling note out there. How much has been returned so far?
We have probably 100 plus million pieces that have been returned so far. But I think the point is we'll only know at the end, because the population have different ways of dealing with this. And unfortunately, some of us wait until the last moment. So it doesn't really indicate much, whatever we have now, because it is quite possible that some have delayed or will delay the conversion until the very last minute, which we don't want that to happen. Of course, there'll be others that will not bring in their money, because they have received they're holding, let's say, proceeds of crime or illicit financial flows. So those obviously will not come back. So we will know for sure where we are until October 1 of this year.
Is there any way you were going to make that public now once this time is done? Tell us, is there any info to show so far that there was indeed unaccounted for money that was flowing in the economy? The
information we have actually is not from the currency conversion. It's actually from other sources. And I think a lot of us are aware of all the corruption cases that have been around. And a lot of that generates a lot of illicit flows, and indeed currencies that people are holding. So there is a lot of anecdotal evidence, of course, in terms of people holding piles of money. But I think the point here is the transactions themselves. You see them, and you don't quite see where they end up, meaning they don't end up in a bank account, they don't end up in say a particular investment. So I think the point is there's a lot of evidence that is on the investigations on corruption, and I think that's really one of the indicators of why we had to do this.
And yes. Of this demonetization process so far, we're 2 months in. Have you seen any suspicious activity? Any returns that seem?
There has been. Every time there is a suspicious, let's say, deposit or suspicious cash transaction, the institutions concerned, and in this particular case we are talking commercial banks, they are required to file a suspicious transaction report. And also, if it is a cash transaction, they are required to file a CTR, cash transaction report, that actually flags the particular thing. Now, there are those that are filed in that way, and therefore they're investigated by the investigators. But there are also others that come, that we've seen, they've come to us, particularly the larger amounts, and we are investigating them because we still feel they're suspicious. As you know, more of the transactions that were of cash that was more than 5 million yes. Kenya shillings, the conversion process requires them to actually get in touch with the central bank. Right. And so we then look at this, and yes, there has been some that we are investigating.
And so, my next question will be, is the DCI, the DPP involved? Kenyans want to know, out of this, at least on that level, will we see some arrests?
I think
will we see out of this process? I
think that concern is a good one. And I think the first thing there is that it shows that the population understand why is it that we are doing this. Meaning, why is it that we are doing the demonetization? It will provide information. That information will eventually be shared with the investigative agencies, and they will obviously begin and complete the investigation. The investigations will not end on September 30th. They will continue.
Right.
Because the information is there. And obviously the investigators are good at correlating other pieces of information, connecting the dots, as it were.
So this is the start of that.
Yes.
But because you've been spearheading this, as a Central Bank of Kenya, there'll be expectations amongst members of the public that now we want to see high-profile arrests. I mean, Kenyans are tired of corruption, and when they hear of any measure that, will stop that, or will, track people who have been either terror, drugs, illicit, you name it, money laundering, how are you going to manage that expectation? That people will say, okay, good, it's the 1st of October, when do we start to see arrests, even though that we know that is not in your ambit? But talk to us about managing the people's expectation with that regard. Yeah,
first and foremost, from our perspective, we need to do a good job in bringing the demonetization to a close. That is the first priority today. And then the second priority, of course, is the information, to provide it to the investigators. We in the Central Bank do not investigate, meaning we are not charged with a mandate, let's say, of the DCI, or for that matter, we don't prosecute. That's the mandate of another office. But I think at the same time, there's a lot of cooperation, as you know, in terms of the various investigators. So the information, no doubt, will get to them. But I don't think the information that will, think of somebody perhaps who is holding a lot of money as the...
Because there's rumors everywhere. People are keeping billions of shillings in their houses. We get a lot of rumors on this.
But the point is, if that person doesn't come forward, there won't be any more information. It will only be that his net wealth will be diminished by the full stock of money that he kept in his mattress, whatever else. So I think the point is, it's not just the issue of finding out looking at the information that is coming to us. It's also looking at the information that is not going to come to us. Because people are out there sort of holding it in places and have not brought it to us.
And so that leads me to ask, what will success look like at the end of this? So September 30th will come, you'll probably sit down, collate all the information. What will success look like? For Kenyans to understand, are you expecting all the 217 million pieces to have been changed? In which case that would mean that you have completely actually laundered all money that would be out there that was illicit. What would success be like on various parameters?
Okay, the first thing, of course, is to bring this to a close with most of our, let's say, or virtually all of our people that are on the lower segment of society, rural areas and etc., having had their money converted. That is important for us as Kenyans, and also as members of wider society. So I don't think the number to begin with is the important thing. Let's first make sure that everyone who is out there, mashinani in the districts, wherever they are, that they actually convert their money. That's success, in my view. Secondly, the idea that some of this money, that is some of the notes, will not have come back. That is important for us. It means that let's say the hypothesis that actually there are people who are holding this money out there will have been validated, because the money wouldn't have come back, and they would be afraid to come back, to bring it back because they know that would lead to some sort of investigation and things like that. How much exactly that is, I cannot tell, because I'll be guessing. Because at this moment, I don't think anyone has a handle as to how much money has been stolen. Also, we should be aware that a lot of this is not, it's not just the stock of the 217 million pieces of 1,000 Kenya shillings note that we had before. It's not just that, because a lot of that, a lot of the funds that had been received illicitly have actually been moved into other properties or other assets, or for that matter, out of the country. But I think a third key element in terms of success, and I think this is what I've seen when I've moved around the country, talked to various people. There is a very strong sense of a new beginning, that actually there'll be less and less of this corruption-fueled sort of money is floating around.
I see.
That, I think, is the sense I get from the population.
Okay. But yet demonetization is part of the efforts to fight corruption. Sure. But yet in this moment, might be unrelated to demonetization, but we've seen, I think, perhaps unprecedented in this country, people at the heart of Treasury, the Cabinet Secretary, the PS, and several senior officials at no less than Treasury, charged with corruption, and we hasten to say they're innocent until proven guilty. But as a person that works in this very sector, how do you feel about that? This is something big when you have the CS for Treasury, his PS, and several senior other officials. It does send worries, to Kenyans that if Treasury can be at the heart, or corruption can be, within Treasury, if at all that is established. What are your thoughts around what happened in Treasury?
Well, I would say a few things. First, I don't think there's anybody who you can say cannot commit these crimes. I think all of us, we have to look at it with a sense of humility, that any of us could be caught up in this sort of corruption scheme, or schemes that lead to that. But I think importantly, when there has been accusations and all that, and people have been brought to a court of law and all that, we do need to allow the due process to take place. That is important. And I should say this is one of the things that maybe we as Kenyans need to be a bit patient, because we are anxious to see things being resolved quickly. But some of these things take time. And I know this for a fact because there has been cases that we've been involved in, and getting the data, bringing it to court, collating it in a way that makes sense, and you can press charges on somebody and all that. That takes time. And I think the court processes also do take time. But I think the idea here is, or the point I would make is that the due process should take place, and then we'll see how this matter will be resolved in terms of the important investments that.
Because I was going to ask about that. I mean, the perception that this sends, to the international community, Kenya being an investment destination. You work in that space.
Sure.
Is it a little more difficult now to say, okay, come in and bring your money into Kenya. It will be safe when you have such high-level arrests and charges at that level?
I think, like most Kenyans, there has been a sense that corruption has reached sort of unprecedented levels. And the only way out of this is actually to fight it directly. I think that is a general concern. And in order to fight it, if it means that some specific investments have to be stopped and dealt, and the data that is generated there be analyzed and so forth, I don't think the issue is more that because so-and-so has been indicted, that things are getting worse. On the contrary, I think it shows that anybody who has been involved in any of these things will be held to account on their actions as appropriate. So I don't think this action in itself makes the rest of the world or even the Kenyans feel that things are getting worse. On the contrary, the cleaning up is very important.
Okay, so you think it sends the right message. But Governor, in those particular cases, banks have also been pinpointed as possible or being allegedly complicit. The DPP and the DCI talked about money being wired from Rome to Dubai, then back to Nairobi, and they talked about a bank in Westlands that was at the heart of billions of shillings being withdrawn in just 4 days. So what is your role as the regulator in terms of reining in rogue banks? Is this something that you are working with the DCI in that case and perhaps others?
I think we work closely with them, with the investigators. We do have our role as a regulator, but first and foremost in all this, we also understand that there is a prioritization on some things, right? So for instance, when a particular case breaks out and is being dealt with, maybe the first responsibility there is to try and, let's say, ring fence the funds that have been stolen. And then so that they can be brought back at the right time. Otherwise, they'll disappear into the mists of international financial sort of systems. You know.
Should this be proven in this case? Will you be doing something about this supposed bank in Westlands that was involved in moving around these billions of shillings?
No, we will get to it. There's no doubt about it. Meaning, if they have violated any of our prudential guidelines, because they are there, then we'll deal with them.
But would you need to wait for the court case for that to happen, or are you able to we investigate and take? The CBK does have mandate.
Absolutely. Right. Remember, we recently did penalize 5 banks and for their actions relating to lack of know your customer, and indeed other anti-money laundering regulations really not complying with that and so forth. So we don't need to wait for other. We work independently in that sense, but we cooperate as needed.
I want to stay on banks for a moment, because your regulation regarding the withdrawal of 1 million shillings or above, there have been allegations that banks are allowing people to have many withdrawals in a day, and you see some of them that are quite cheeky. So you move 999,999, and several of these transactions are done in a day over the course of time. And some say that, then people who are doing illegal business are able to circumvent that regulation, and that perhaps it in no way helps to curb or trace illicit financial flows?
Yeah. That would be the case if you cannot connect the 5 transactions that are 999, 999, and all that. But the point is, with the use of various technologies, those sort of connections can be made like this. So they can be flagged. And as you can imagine, they are flagged right away. And it isn't just the 999s, meaning 1 shilling less than below the radar, as it were. I mean, as there are the sort of transactions that one looks at that you could say, but I would say that those are easy. And that's not where the problem is, because they are more complicated mechanisms, and those are the ones that obviously we need to be sure that we don't end up being used. I mean, a classic one, as you say, the 999, but another one is having different accounts, And
then you just keep the balances.
But that is very easy to deal with.
All right.
So technology has got to a point where actually the AML CFT
so for my viewers who don't know what AML
so
CFT
the
is.
technologies that the banks are using for the anti-money laundering requirements, I mean, it detects that very easily, and it flags it right away.
And then when you flag that,
the bank is then
what then happens?
So frankly, what happens is that as a customer, I can come up to make a deposit or any of these things, and let's say the bank considers this to be suspicious because I don't make those sort of transactions. I have just been receiving a salary check or deposit at the end of the month, and then suddenly I have 10 million or even a million surfaces, and I bring it in some ways, and the bank needs to ask me, what is this and why is it, and can you give us documentation on this and so forth. And I could say, well, actually, you know what, I did sell a piece of property or whatever else it is. If they are satisfied, then they will let it go through. If they are not, they can do various things, and one of which is actually to flag it as a suspicious transaction. It depends on how uncomfortable they are with the transaction. And they can let it through, but still flag it as a suspicious transaction for further reference to the financial reporting center, the central bank, etc. However, if they are very uncomfortable with it, they can actually refuse to actually accept it. And then they'll send it back to you. And it is your business. And actually, it can get to a point where they decide to close your account. So it can get to that level. And it has, actually.
Yes. Do you think banks here, because I know you've been reining in on rogue banks, and do you think we've gotten to that level in Kenya where banks are now
I can tell you for sure, yes.
Okay.
We have had that, and we have had instances where the banks have closed accounts because they're very uncomfortable with the relationship that they have with a particular customer.
Okay, because we've seen some banks being fined as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
My final question to you, just back to the demonetization. So we have a month to go. What are you doing to ensure that the new 1,000 notes don't suffer the same fate as the old 1,000 notes, so that we find ourselves demonetizing a few years from now?
I think the first element here is to make sure that once we are done with this, the war against corruption will be sustained. And so most of the, let's say, illicit flows will no longer be taking place in this jurisdiction. In a sense, we have to clean up the jurisdiction. And it isn't just Kenya, but actually also the neighboring countries. And I should say that the other neighboring countries have actually been very supportive because it helps them as well. So that's the first point. So we shouldn't go back to it. And in a sense, you could say that you drive the bad money out of this jurisdiction. That, I think, is very important. Secondly, the issue of moving more and more towards non-cash transactions.
So is there evidence of that so far?
Oh, yeah, M-Pesa. You have that.
M-Pesa's number one competition is still cash transactions, according to the report.
But I think the point is that the convenience of M-Pesa and other platforms that M-Pesa like, obviously that is where we need to go. So a lot of some of our economists and others talk about cash-less society. I actually would rather call it a less cash society. So less cash, not at the levels that we have, you know. So in a sense, we need to move into those directions. And if we do that, I think it will be much easier to sustain.
Prevent us from going back to where we've come, that we needed this. Governor of Central Bank of Kenya, Dr. Patrick Njoroge, I thank you for your time. I understand you had a great time in northern Kenya. Well, what would this interview be without introducing someone who was my former colleague?
Okay, who's that?
Wallace Kantai.
Wallace Kantai, he's here.
What are you? You're a former colleague, you're a...
Recovering journalist.
Oh, come on now. It's a great profession.
And he wanted
and a Bloomberg fellow.
He wanted to remind me to give you this.
Really?
This is a T-shirt that's talking about Uko Tayari, and I hope all
what does it say at the back?
At the back it says you need to...
Badilisha noti za 1,000 sasa.
Very good.
So you have until 30th of September, a month. Thank you very much.
Very good.
And we hope it fits. Say that on the microphone.
And we hope it fits, yes. Wallace says that on the microphone. You hope it fits. Do I look this? But anyway, I will wear it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yvonne.
We appreciate your time and all the best.